Perhaps I was a little too generous to Stygian Onslaught? Let's talk about it. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. Okay, so I'm mostly making this follow-up for a couple of reasons. Namely because I received a lot of comments on my last video that did really help put into perspective for me why people don't like this game mode and why some others do. And I do feel like, considering the criticisms that I've heard, maybe I was a little bit too nice about the game mode. Because now I can understand where some people's frustrations were coming from. At first, I didn't really see a problem because getting the Primo Gems was very accessible, but a lot of people do really want to get the Feathers. Those are useful, especially for people in early game, but people in early game are not going to be getting those Feathers easily, if at all. And I do have to agree that the shilling for bosses is kind of insane. I think that for D5 at the very least, which is Fearless mode, they should make it a little bit easier. If not easier, then make it less shill-centric, so not owning specific characters doesn't harm your ability to obtain the Feathers. I mostly got super hyped up about it because it looked like Deadly Assault from Zenless, and I really like that game mode, but I can agree that it does feel really shill-heavy in the later stages. I've also seen some people say that it just feels like another big bout of HP inflation, and that just doesn't feel good to play against, and I can completely understand that. In fact, I don't really like HP inflation myself either. Like I said, I just think Deadly Assault is really cool, and it just seems to kind of be in that structure, hence why I liked it. But now that I've actually had the time to let the game mode sit with me for a while, and really think it over, I would say that there are a couple of things they could do to make it better. First of all, I do think it needs to be less shill-centric. What I mean by that is I do feel like owning particular characters is basically a requirement to clear on Fearless. I got some comments on my last video from people who have very well invested accounts, and they've been playing for a very, very long time, but they still can't clear, and that actually kind of checks out, because while it is a big vertical investment check, they do also want you to have a very large roster of characters so that you're able to deal with very specific scenarios. For example, I think the worst boss this Stygian Onslaught is easily Hydro Tulpa. Even I was having trouble with that, because I needed to use my Skirk on the third chamber, but I don't really have my Moika that well built because I'm just gonna be honest, I don't play her that much. So even though I do own the technical best answer to the first chamber, I still feel like I have to use Skirk there, but then I don't really have anything for the third chamber, and it just kind of ends up being a bit of a mess. So I'm actually struggling with Fearless mode. Now in that sense, I had gotten excited because I felt like there was a reason for me to go and level up my Moika's talents and all that. But I can understand why that would be very, very frustrating for others. Because most people just aren't going to have that wide roster of characters that are going to let them take on literally every single situation. And even though the weapon skin is cosmetic, I can see why some people are annoyed that it's locked behind a whale tier game mode. Sure, the weapon skin is temporary, it doesn't last forever, but I suppose it's more so the principle of it, that there is this reward that is locked behind a game mode that only a very specific section of players are going to be able to access. And I can understand how it just kind of feels scummy in a sense to people, like, they made this game mode so that you particularly use these characters, and they really encourage that you pull for these characters. And I've seen some people say that if you don't have a Scofier, then the recent game mode just doesn't feel good at all because of how shilled Cryo is. So now it's understandable. I feel like a big part of my enjoyment of the game mode is just because I have most characters. I see that now. And the Primo Gem rewards are not as amazingly generous as I had first assumed. It is just 450 a month. Which I do believe that's more than the usual small events, but it's like barely anymore. A usual small event would give you about 420, correct me if I'm wrong on that. Stygian Onslaught gives you 30 more. They usually seem to do this. Whenever they made Imaginarium Theater, I do think that our overall poll count did increase by like 1 or 2. It wasn't like a dramatic increase, it was just a small one. But you get the idea, it's not like we got way more polls than usual. So I can understand why a lot of people just don't like Stygian Onslaught. Now, I have seen some other people that do still like it for similar reasons that I said before. It feels like the first Genshin endgame that's genuinely challenging, but in response to that, some have said, it's not really challenging if it's just really big HP numbers that want you to use specific characters. It's not necessarily fair, and that's also completely fine. I think the main thing that I do agree with everyone on, make the Feathers accessible to everyone. It does make sense why people that are still trying to build up their characters would want those Feathers, especially because you can literally choose roles. Like, this is not some useless resource. This is something that people are genuinely going to be able to make great use out of, so I can understand that. I didn't really get why a lot of people didn't like it, because to me it seemed fine, because as long as you got the Primo Gems, that's kind of the main thing that matters. But not everyone cares about that. Some people would genuinely rather the artifact reroll Feathers, and some people do genuinely care about that cosmetic, and they don't like the idea of it being locked behind a big paywall, essentially. And even though it's temporary, this could open the floodgates to them doing more stuff like this in the future, hiding very particular cosmetics or just kind of cool items behind a really big challenge or paywall. It does make more sense to me now, because it's not really about the fact that the cosmetic is useless and it's optional and it's temporary. That's not the point. It's the fact that it's just still a cool thing, and people will still want that cool thing. Just because you don't need it doesn't necessarily mean that, you don't want it. And typically speaking, anytime we've gotten some cool rewards or accessories or just anything like that, it's usually been free. Take I don't know, the pet Sealies, for example. We usually get that from a free event. I can't remember the exact details of the event. I think you have to find stuff or something like that. Some kind of treasure map. But the point is that they're usually free, and you just kind of get them over time if you've been playing for a long time because they've ran that event a couple of times at this point. Or just other unique pets you get from permanent events and just stuff like that for free. Or even 4-star skins, you usually get those for free from major version events. Usually when there is something cool like that, with the exception of paid 5-star skins, you typically get them for free. So I can understand why some people just really don't like that there is a reward for being a whale, essentially. I will say though, I don't necessarily think that simply having an endgame space for whales to go and test their stuff is bad, but I can understand not locking integral resources and cool skins behind said, big whale stage. I just didn't really have a problem with it myself because it was just a random cosmetic that I didn't really care about. I just kind of thought it was cool and that was it. But other people are going to care more about that, And for some people, clearing the full endgame, to them that is clearing. To some people, just getting all the Primo Gems, that is not enough for them to consider themselves to have fully cleared. They need that complete clear in order for them to have considered the game beaten. And to those people, it is going to come off as incredibly pay to win, because they literally cannot beat the last stage if they do not spend a lot of money on their characters, or if they don't save over a really long time to C6 these characters. I do genuinely appreciate everybody giving me the feedback on the last video, and just being completely honest and saying, dude, this take is really, really bad, what are you talking about? Because that helps me get a new perspective. And I actually managed to look into it a little bit more, think about it more, and actually I did go and discuss it with some friends. They've had differing opinions. Some of them really liked it. Some of them felt like the shilling was a bit too much. I had this discussion with people. And it's good to just be called out for being stupid when you're being stupid. Now, with that being said, there are some people that did agree with me that it was fun, and it did genuinely feel like the difficult game mode that they've always been waiting for. And like I said, I really, really like the structure of it, because I know that a lot of people haven't played ZZZ, but for those of you who haven't, this essentially has a very similar structure to a particular endgame in ZZZ, which is my favorite gacha game endgame. I just think it's really, really fun. But I would still say that Zenless handled it a lot better, because even though they do encourage that you use particular weakness types, you yourself can just choose the buffs, and the boss mechanics, they're usually not tied to a specific character. I mean, I do think they added one recently that is tied to new rupture units. But usually, there's a boss where if you dodge, you get some extra score. Or there's another one where if you parry, you get some extra score. It's kind of like that, because instead of it being timer-based, it's more score-based. I think my enjoyment of the game mode just came from a place of having a lot of characters, and I just happen to have invested into characters that are really good for this particular rotation. And another thing is we have to see how this develops over time, because here's the thing. It could get better over time, but it could also get worse. If it got worse, I would assume that the HP inflation would just continue, and it would become basically impossible to clear without the shilling buffs. See, I probably would have had a much more negative initial opinion of the game mode if they locked any of the Primo Gems behind the really difficult stages. But they didn't, so I didn't see an initial issue with it, and they gave a lot of Mora out, so I was like, okay, hey, that's pretty cool. But as I can see, it's definitely not for everyone. I can see that there are definitely some major outlying flaws of the game mode that do need to be resolved. And even though I do think it has some good qualities, I don't want to completely just say now it's bad, because I did have fun with it. I would be lying if I said I didn't have fun with it. I did enjoy my time. I did enjoy co-oping with it. And I do still think that out of the endgame modes that Genshin has to offer at the current moment, this one was probably the one that I enjoyed the most. But I do think that me calling the endgame amazing is a bit of a stretch, because it's pretty clear that it's just good for a subset of players that have whaled on the game, because what I've noticed is that for people who do have a lot of characters, they thought it was fun, because Deadly Assault is just fun. It is fun if you have the characters, but if you don't, then yeah, it kind of sucks. So it's not really good of me to say, yeah, it's amazing, because, I mean, for some people, it's just really not, is it? All in all, I would say that to fix the game mode, make difficulty 5 less hard, make it less shill-centric, and just generally make at least the feathers more accessible. I would say in the future, they shouldn't lock cosmetics behind whale tier stages Because regardless of whoever cares about them or not, some people are really going to care and they're just going to consider that really scummy. And then I think that will be a lot better for a lot of people. Once again, I appreciate everyone who just kind of was like, okay, this is just not a good take, and people who actually did take the time to explain why they didn't like the game mode, because it's important perspective. And definitely let me know down below if you still feel like there's something that I said that was just kind of like, this is like one of the worst takes I've ever heard in my life. So with that being said, this has been Juice signing out, and let's hope that Stygian Onslaught could improve in the future.